a devoted husband, a reckless affair, a brutal revenge. When Vanessa's betrayal is exposed, her lover ends up in the hospital, her marriage collapses, and her children are taken from her. But just when she thinks she's lost everything, Damien reveals his final, most devastating move. What happens next will leave you speechless. I never imagined, not even in my darkest nightmares, that I would be sitting in an ambulance, gripping the limp, bloodied hand of my lover, watching the paramedics work desperately to keep him alive. The man I had thrown my entire life away for was barely breathing, his swollen face barely recognizable after the ruthless beating my husband had given him. And Damien, my husband, the man I once thought incapable of violence, had walked away without a shred of remorse, as if he had simply taken out the trash. I was the architect of this disaster. I had a perfect life once. A devoted husband, 2 beautiful children, a home filled with warmth and security. Damien had given me everything, but I wanted more. I wanted to feel desired again, to experience the kind of reckless passion that had been missing from my marriage for years. That's when I met Michael. It was supposed to be a harmless trip, a week in Miami for my best friend's wedding. Just 1 week to escape the monotony of my life. Damien wasn't thrilled about me leaving, especially since our 2 kids would be home without me, but I convinced him it was fine. I had no intention of betraying him. But then, at the wedding reception, I met Michael. He was younger, charming, confident, the kind of man who looked at me the way Damien hadn't in years. It started with stolen glances, then flirtation, then drinks that went on too long. By the time I realized what I was doing, it was already too late. Michael whispered things into my ear that made my skin burn. He touched me like he already owned me, and I let him. That night, we ended up in his hotel room, and for the first time in years, I felt wanted. I told myself it was just one mistake. I would go home, forget it ever happened, and return to being a good wife and mother. But Michael had other plans. After I returned, he kept reaching out. At first, I ignored him. Then, I responded. Slowly, I let myself fall deeper into the danger. We started meeting in secret. A hotel here, a stolen afternoon there. The thrill was intoxicating. I convinced myself that as long as Damien didn't know, no one was getting hurt. I underestimated my husband. Damien was sharp, intuitive. He noticed the change in me. The way I avoided his touch. The way I became defensive when he asked where I had been. He started watching me closely, tracking my movements, studying my behavior. And then, one night, I made a fatal mistake. Michael had convinced me to meet him at a hotel downtown. I waited until Damien had gone to bed, tiptoed out of the house, and took a cab to meet my lover. I thought I had covered my tracks. I was wrong. Damien had followed me. He waited in the darkness, watching as I laughed with Michael, as I kissed him in the hotel lobby. And when Michael walked out to his car, Damien struck. It happened so fast. Michael didn't even see it coming. 1 second, he was unlocking his car. The next, Damien was there, grabbing him by the collar and slamming his fist into his jaw with a sickening crack. Blood splattered onto the pavement. Michael staggered, dazed, but Damien didn't stop. A knee to the ribs. A punch to the stomach. A brutal uppercut that sent Michael sprawling to the ground. I screamed, ran to pull Damien off him, but he shoved me away like I was nothing. "This is what you threw our family away for," he snarled, delivering another merciless kick to Michael's ribs. This weak, pathetic excuse for a man. Michael coughed up blood, gasping for air, but Damien wasn't finished. He grabbed him by the shirt and lifted him off the ground. "You thought you could take what's mine and walk away?" The sound of knuckles against flesh echoed through the night. Michael let out a strangled cry as Damien drove his fist into his face again. "Stop!" I shrieked, clawing at Damien's arm. "You're going to kill him." He turned his gaze on me then, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw something terrifying in his eyes. Hatred. But he let Michael go, letting him slump to the ground like a broken doll. His hands were trembling, his breathing ragged. He looked at me, then at the blood on his knuckles, then back at me again. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Damien, please. Get out." I stood frozen as he turned on his heel and walked away, stepping over Michael's battered body like he was nothing. The ambulance arrived minutes later. I rode with Michael, my hands shaking, my world collapsing. And I knew this was only the beginning. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and despair. The waiting room was nearly empty, except for a crying mother and an elderly man coughing into a tissue. But I wasn't paying attention to them. My entire focus was on Michael, my so-called lover, who was in surgery, barely clinging to life after the beating Damien had given him. I sat there, trembling, my dress still stained with his blood. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My thoughts were a chaotic storm. I had lost everything in a single night. I pulled out my phone and hesitated before dialing Damien's number. He didn't answer. I tried again. Voicemail. Damien, please. I choked out, my voice trembling. We need to talk. I'm so sorry. Please, don't throw everything away like this. Just call me back. I hung up, knowing deep down that he never would. Hours passed before a doctor finally approached me. His expression was grim. Are you family? He asked. I hesitated. I had no right to claim Michael as my own, not after the disaster I had caused. No, just a friend, I muttered. The doctor exhaled. He has several fractured ribs, a broken jaw, and internal bleeding. We managed to stabilize him, but he's not out of danger yet. He'll be in recovery for a while. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Can I see him? Only for a moment. He's unconscious. I stepped into the cold, sterile room. Michael lay there, motionless, tubes running from his arms, his face swollen beyond recognition. This wasn't the confident, charming man I had met in Miami. This was a broken shell of a human being. And it was all my fault. I reached out to touch his hand, but stopped myself. What was I doing? Michael wasn't my responsibility. I had a husband. I had children. No, I had them. Past tense. Because I had just destroyed my entire life. By the time I arrived back at the house, it was past dawn. The moment I stepped out of the cab, my stomach twisted into knots. My clothes, my shoes, even my wedding photos, everything I owned was scattered across the front lawn. My breath hitched. My heart pounded against my ribs. I stepped forward, shaking, but the door swung open before I could knock. Damien stood in the doorway, a whiskey glass in his hand, his knuckles still raw and bruised from the beating he had given Michael. You're back, he said coolly, as if he had been expecting me. Damien, please, I whispered. Let's talk. He took a slow sip, his gaze piercing through me. Then, with calculated indifference, he stepped aside. I walked inside, and my blood turned to ice. The house had been stripped of any trace of me. My pictures were gone. My things had been removed. The only thing that remained was our wedding photo on the coffee table, with a knife stabbed through my face. I staggered back, ball rising in my throat. You knew, I breathed. Damien exhaled sharply. I knew. I gripped the edge of the table, my legs shaking. For how long? Since the night you came back from Miami, he said. You smelled different. You smiled too much. And when I touched you, you flinched. I closed my eyes, swallowing back tears. I had been so reckless, so blind. Did you ever love me? His voice was quiet, deadly. A sob caught in my throat. Damien, I don't, he snapped, slamming his glass onto the table. I want the truth, Vanessa. Did you love me? Or was I just convenient? The silence stretched between us, suffocating. I loved you, I whispered. But I was selfish. His jaw clenched, his fists tightening. Selfish. Then, in one terrifying motion, he lunged. His hand gripped the back of my head and slammed me into the wall. Stars exploded in my vision. My hands clawed at his grip, but he didn't let go. I gave you everything, he growled, his breath hot against my face. A home. A family. I worked myself to the bone so you'd never have to struggle. And this is how you repay me. Tears streamed down my face. Damien, please. His grip loosened, and I gasped for breath, stumbling back. He turned away, breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists. You disgust me, he muttered. I wiped my tears, shaking my head violently. I won't let you take them from me. Damien's lips curled into a cold smirk. You already lost them, Vanessa. You just don't know it yet. Then, before I could respond, he walked upstairs and slammed the bedroom door shut. The conversation was over. The next few days were a blur. Damien stayed true to his word. The divorce papers arrived, followed by a brutal custody battle. He presented every piece of evidence, my absence, my neglect, my affair. I had no defense. The judge's ruling was swift. Full custody to Damien. Supervised visitation for me. I collapsed in the courtroom. I had lost my children. When I returned to my apartment that night, alone and broken, I checked my phone for the first time in days. Michael had blocked me. Not only that, He had pressed charges against Damien for assault. He wanted revenge. I should have been angry, but all I felt was exhaustion. I had destroyed everything. My marriage, my family, my dignity. And for what? A man who abandoned me the second things got hard? I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were hollow, my face gaunt. The woman I used to be was gone. I had paid the price for my sins. And now, I had to live with it. The end.